All right, it looks like we've hit kind of the full attendees at this point. Well, welcome everybody. This is the kind of next to last ACAPS webinar we think for the fall. And we really designed this as a chance for you to ask any of the questions that you may have about the upcoming process. And Dr. Becker and I will do our best to try to provide upfront and honest answers. When you ask questions, you can ask them through the chat function. We will not be announcing who the question is from, so we will keep that anonymous, but we will answer the question posed. I will say that there is one more webinar planned for next month, which will be an official kind of nuts and bolts series of recommendations from ACAPS related to the interview process this fall. The reason that we are not doing it yet is because some of those are still being ironed out. The actual annual business meeting, or one of the business meetings for ACAPS, occurs, I believe, in 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks. And so I think there'll be some more final decisions made then. And so it's one of the reasons why we're not doing this until, or that webinar until after that, but it will still be a month before the interview offers start. And so hopefully that will help provide kind of some of the nuts and bolts groundwork. But with that, Deborah, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we can start kind of going into questions.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Deborah Becker. And what we've been doing for ACAPS these past couple of months is trying to provide students with accurate information about the plastic surgery match and give students as many tools as we can for each of you to be successful in the match. And now, as everyone is getting closer to their applications, I know that there have been a lot of changes recently and things that have come up. So what we wanted to do was just give you an opportunity to ask questions freely. And again, we can't necessarily answer specifics about programs, but we can talk about the process and about ACAPS roles and ACAPS positions on things.
So with that, kind of the first question here, for letters of recommendation, there is a specific plastic surgery form. And I'm assuming that this is related to the ACAPS form. Do letter of recommendation writers who are not plastic surgeons also fill out this form, i.e. other surgeons, research mentors, or is this just for plastic surgeons? So I'll take this one. And so there is an ACAPS form. It's been something that's been in the works for the past 5 or 6 years to try to provide some more standardized information. I will tell you that I think about 50% of letter writers choose to use it in addition to their normal letter. There's probably about 5% of letter writers who only use it. And I think there's probably about 40 to 50% that actually don't use it. Obviously, and I'm not speaking directly for ACAPS here. I know ACAPS would promote its utilization, but it hasn't caught on with everybody. I will tell you that as a student, you are not at all penalized if your letter writers use or don't use that form. I think we probably see it more from plastic surgeons just because they're used to it, and program directors and those types of folks. If you provide it to non-plastic surgeons, if they fill it out, great. If they don't, I promise you, nobody's going to hold your letter of recommendation writer in any less esteem, or what they say any less powerful. So, I think the appropriate thing for you to do is provide it if you do. If for some reason you didn't, don't worry about it. Your letter of writer, if they really feel strongly about using it, knows where to find it. If they are one of the surgeons who doesn't feel as strongly about it, then they probably wouldn't. But I think it's great if you can provide it, but if you don't, or your letter of writer does not want to fill it out, I promise you it is not going to at all impact the review of your application, because programs don't hold what others do and don't do against you. So, Deborah, I don't know if you have a different thought on that, but.
No, that's true. Like, the key to the letter of recommendation is really the quality of the letter itself, more than the format. And so we now have a couple comments on the Plastic Surgery Common App, and I'm actually glad that it came up so soon, because I know that it's been on everybody's mind. So ACAPS, what I'll say first is ACAPS does not have an official position right now on the plastic surgery common application. The idea behind it, from my understanding, was that it is very difficult to differentiate for programs among applicants. Who's really interested in our program, who's not so interested in our program, and who's just applying as a safety. And when you get hundreds of applications, people think it may be useful to have some sort of sense of who really likes your program and who is just applying. So one proposal that has been that's been brought up is, well, if we have specific applications, if there are ways that programs can have people answer specific questions, that might be one way. That cannot be done through ERAS right now. And so, among other things, this plastic surgery application was designed as a way to possibly be a vehicle to allow programs and applicants to connect in that way. The PSCA is not being used by all programs. There is a list of programs that are using it. And what we've been recommending is, if you are interested in a program, find out if they are using this form. Now, ACAP's involvement in this may change in the future, but right now, ACAPS has no position on it. That isn't to say that if you really want to go to a program that is using this, then that you shouldn't, because ACAPS doesn't have a position. It's just that we weren't involved in the creation of it.
Yeah, I think kind of Deborah hit it on the head, and I feel the same way. I think it's an interesting idea. I think the idea of, you guys don't see the downside of it, but sometimes reading the ERAS applications is actually tricky. You can't tell what's important, what's not, and so sometimes asking people to prioritize, a limited number of important activities may actually give you better insight into them versus reading a list of 20 things on activities, or 20 research items. Not that everyone has 20, but I think there's potential value here. It is a little bit unique this year, and some programs are using it. I think you have to make your own decision about if you want to use it or not. I would. This is just my own personal opinion, and I think that that probably the programs that want to use it are probably going to look a little more favorably on it.
I would say that as a matter of strategy, if somebody came to me and said, I really want to go to this program, and they're using ERAS and they're also using this other thing, but they say I don't have to do it, should I do it? My advice would probably be, do it. If they're participating in it, they are certainly not going to hold it against you if you engage in something that is clearly important to the program. And I want to, there's another question: why has ACAPS not endorsed or put forth an avenue to signal exceptional interest in programs? And so I'd like to frame this by saying, we all recognize that there's a problem on both sides. Programs want to know who's really interested in the program and really wants to match there, and who's just applying there because they're applying to every program. And students who are applying want a way to signal to programs that they truly are interested. And that would help de-escalate the arms race. But the best way to do that is not clear. Signaling interest to a program seems like low-hanging fruits, but there may be some unintended consequences of doing that, because what it is sort of doing is asking you to decide where you want to go before you've ever interviewed there. So consider, if you do signal to a program that you have exceptional interest in that program, and there's another program that you don't have exceptional interest in, and then you go to interview and it completely flips. The program that you thought that you were interested in, you decide, you know what, the culture there isn't for me, and the program that you thought that you didn't like, you ended up loving. You can't backtrack on that. And so what are the implications of sort of a pre-signal for that? And then the problem with signaling interest after a program, after you've done all of your interviews, is that you may cross the line with certain, regulations in terms of contact with programs. So it becomes quickly very nuanced. And I would say that the answer isn't so straightforward. And that is why ACAPS hasn't come strongly on the side of one particular solution. These are all sorts of different solutions. Having an application that is not an ERAS application, where programs could theoretically require a paragraph or two about why you're interested in that program. One of my kids applied to college last year, and it's routine that each college has their individual questions, and some colleges had 5 essays specific to that, like, why is this school a good fit for you in particular? So that's another model in addition to signaling. You have anything to add, Jeff?
Yeah, so there's both a philosophical and a theoretical discussion about the idea of this signaling, and I think a number of specialties have looked into that. There is this other issue that specifically this year, there is a company, there may be more, but at least one called Signal Tokens, and that's probably what you guys are referring to, that has, offered the opportunity to communicate with a program on your behalf after you have purchased those number of tokens. The ACAPS, at least board of directors, has discouraged the use of the Signal token specifically, for a number of various reasons. I don't know that all the programs are going to feel the same way. To be honest, I actually think most of the programs don't even know about this company. If you wanted my prediction, I think if a program director got an email from signalingtoken.com that said, Joe's interested in your program, I'm not sure many of them would actually put a ton of weight in it at this point, because it really is kind of a new concept and they wouldn't know all the nuances of what's involved there. That company has gone and talked to, our understanding is, a number of the other residency organizations, and there are a limited number that are actively participating specifically, and a number that have said they will not participate, or they're running their own internal version of that. So I personally don't think that there's probably a ton of utility in it, because I don't think most of the program directors out there really are aware that it's even an option. And don't forget, there's been lots of other ways that people have signaled to programs that they're interested, whether it's attending Instagram events, whether it's reaching out to program directors, et cetera. So I just don't think that there's a lot of value in it this year, specifically, especially from an outside company that is not affiliated with the match directly, is not sponsored. This is not something that ACAPS said, yes, we all want everyone to do this and we want to use their format. So that's my thoughts on it for this year. I do think down the road, it's something that people are considering. It's a really interesting discussion when you try to figure out, well, how many programs should you be allowed to signal to? Because if my initial thought when I had heard about this was, oh, well, you should be able to signal to 10 to 15 programs. And then when you actually talk to some of the other specialties that have trialed this in different versions, one of the problems is that if you have too many, then that automatically becomes your interview list. One of the great parts about doing visiting sub-Is is that everybody knows you can only do a couple of them. So nobody holds it against you when you don't go to their program as a visiting sub-I, because they know you can only go to 2 or 3 programs typically. And for whatever reason, your family, your interests, your mentors, you may not have chosen program X, and they really don't hold that against you. They still look at your application. If you install a program that uses this kind of idea of token or signals, if the number's large, then really any program that you didn't signal isn't even interested in you, or may not want to look at your application. So that's kind of a little bit more of a philosophical discussion. We're obviously going to be interested in input moving forward. I'm guessing ACAPS will take a close look at the couple of specialties that have trialed their own internal versions of it. I believe ENT has trialed it, and they've actually done it in the past in a similar fashion. And I think urology may be trialing it as well, but don't quote me on that exactly. And so we're going to, when I say we, I mean ACAPS will probably follow along, but specifically using the Signal Tokens company this year, at least is not recommended by the board of directors. And I'm not sure, and what I've told my advisees as well, I just don't think that many programs are going to respond to it personally. But
and also none of this is new. These issues and these things are not new. They have been the arms race issue. How can you signal to a program that you are interested? What does that mean? These discussions have been going on for at least 6 years on the national stage across specialties. So now it's kind of turning into action. But it's not like this all of a sudden came up.
I think one of the questions to follow up on this is, is why hasn't ACAPS endorsed or done a similar program? And while Deborah and I can't directly speak for all the programs in ACAPS and the board of directors, we really do. We try to be your advocates, I will say, in the process. But I mean, I think it's because there wasn't a format or a setup that ACAPS thought was appropriate for this year. I mean, I will say that like otolaryngology has done something similar in the past. So they were farther ahead in terms of the development of an internal system for it. And there's pros and cons to it. We've had some of the leaders in that field actually speak at ASPS and ACAPS board and conference meetings about their experience. And there's pros and cons. And just like anything with the interview season, I think, fundamentally trialing lots of new things may or may not be perfect this year, just because of we're playing in a whole different field than we have in the past. So I can't again speak directly for ACAPS, but I think it's because something wasn't set up in advance, and these are things that are best set up well in the future, so everybody knows the rules, applicants and programs, and go forward with that.
I'll go back to some of the earlier questions. Do programs consider application updates post ERAS submission? If they do, when would you say would kind of a deadline to update programs? So it is a good idea to update programs, but you want to be judicious about how you are updating programs. So something really major that happens that you think may change your chance of getting an interview, sure. Or if you had, for example, no publications, and between the submission of the application and finding out, you want to update the program that you now have 3 accepted manuscripts. Okay, that may tip the scales a little in your favor, but if it's something that likely won't tip the scales, like say you've done a presentation before and you have another presentation accepted, that probably, I mean, you can, but it probably won't help. And it just creates worry for you and administrative burden. What people have done is brought updates to interviews. Once they've gotten an interview, I've had people who come in and they say, okay, since I submitted my application, here's what's happened. But depending on the process of how all of the applications are reviewed, somebody who's reviewing your application may not get an update before the decision is made. So for example, some programs, once all the applications are in, distribute all of the applications among the faculty to read and to grade, and somebody may have already been through your application by the time you send an update.
I think another way to look at this question as well is, I think programs are going to be downloading applications relatively soon after that October 21st deadline. I think there will be a little bit of, in the past, plastic surgery has been slow, and I'm guessing most programs will take, a couple of days, because there's going to be dean's letters and letters of recommendation that have to trickle in. But I don't think your goal should be to have your application in before October 21st. And I apologize if I have the date wrong, but I'm pretty sure October 21st is the deadline for when programs can access everything. I would not wait much beyond that, because I think everyone's going to everyone's eager to start this process. So, if you're sitting there going, oh, well, maybe I'll just wait a week, I think that's not a smooth move. I would make sure it's in, because programs are going to start looking at it. At least some programs will. I mean, there's definitely programs that are going to be chomping at the bit, and they're going to want to sort this all out very quickly, especially because things are still chaotic at many of our health systems. So it's just another way to think about it. But yeah, I agree. If you have something major, you can definitely kind of update that, and let the program know, or let the program coordinator know that something has changed. But for the most part, you really need to have this done before the deadline, or before the date that programs get access to your charts. I can guarantee you that very few programs are going to be sitting there on December 3rd still trying to make their interview list. That has have been already done by then. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to move on to another question about whether it's appropriate to include work experiences from college or from volunteer experience in high school. And what I would say to that is, if it has helped shape you as a person and can give somebody insight into who you are and your values, I say absolutely include it. I've seen applications where people say that they were expected to work at their family's business since the age of 8. Well, that tells me a lot about the person, that that they're a hard worker, that that was meaningful to them, that they can be dedicated to a single endeavor. So yes, I do think, to the extent that it was meaningful, include things that have helped shape you. If you won an award for science fair in 8th grade, I would leave that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything college and medical school for most applicants is fair game, right? Anything that's happened in the last 10 years is appropriate, and being a little bit judicious about that. I mean, the 1 hour that you did at the car wash, for your whatever your sorority fraternity in college, that probably doesn't count anymore. But if you had some real meaningful activity, it's great to include. And if it is some longitudinal thing that goes back to high school, great. But again, for the most part, once you're kind of beyond 10 years from now, it's probably less relevant, unless it's really, shaped you in some way, shape, or form. It's part of your personal statement. It's appropriate to have on there. But then you've also probably included it if it's really been that important in your personal statement or somewhere else. And it's the same way as you keep going through your career, because once you're a resident, then people don't really have an interest in what you did in college. And once you're beyond residency, people have less of an interest in what you did in medical school. The other question similar to this is, on the experiences section, would you rather see paragraph format or bullet points? And I guess my answer, I don't have a strong preference, other than I want it to be short and succinct. I think the experience session of ERAS, that is probably one of the least closely scrutinized parts of the application personally, because everybody has lots of things listed, and it's very tough for me as a reader to sort out what was important and not. But I think if you have something that's succinct, whether it's in prose or bullet points, people are used to both, and I don't think they have a preference or would judge your application any differently. If you put 3 paragraphs or 20 bullet points, they're not going to be interested.
Yeah, and keep in mind too that what you really want to highlight is those really meaningful experiences that really helped shape who you are. Remember that people are reading hundreds of applications and they're usually reading them very quickly. So a lot of times they're skimming. And whether or not that's right or wrong, we can leave for another time. But to the extent that that may be happening, you do want to kind of stack the deck in your favor. And so I agree. Keep it short and sweet, whatever format you use.
And I'll be honest, I mean, you all have lots of activities, and I think we showed, if we go back to when this whole thing started in March or April, and we kind of gave the first talk on what matters in an application, the experiences thing has almost no influence on it because everybody has done their activities. And I actually think that if you're trying to highlight the critical things that are important and you want them to be seen, consider removing some of the small things. I will tell you, and I'd love to tell you I spend a half an hour reading every application that I get asked to read for my program, but I don't. I go through them very quickly. And when I get to that experiences list, if everything just has 5 hours, or 1 hour, or it's kind of I did this little thing, I actually don't read all the other ones sometimes. And I know that's disheartening, but I think there's lots of other people that read through these quickly. So, really think about putting the important things there so that they grab people's attention and they take a longer look at them.
There are a few questions about communication rules and contact regulations. So there is to be no contact after the interview between a program and an applicant. So no official contact. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but people can contact programs up until the interview. It is after the interview that it is a pretty strict no contact rule. So, and afterwards, that means that with the exception of faculty with whom you have a prior relationship and you have, a mentorship relationship, like, at your home institution or a known mentor, there should be no contact between the program and the applicants. And that's just sort of level the playing field. I believe with thank you cards, I think that if they are sent, I'm not sure that they are forwarded from the program. I can't recall ever getting one. So
I think, yeah, and so I will tell you that I think this is one of the items that will be addressed in the November meeting by Dr. Weber, the chair of ACAPS. There has been a long-standing post-interview communication policy for ACAPS, and programs actually previously were required to show you that slide during their introduction. Specifically, it asked for no contact, no thank you letters. And I will say it's been probably 4 or 5 years since I've received a thank you letter. And so it's not like it's one of these things that, it's a rule, but yet everybody's doing it. I promise you nobody's doing it. And to be honest, if you send one to the program, it's almost seemed like you didn't know how to follow the rules. So there is, if you go on to the ACAPS website under the medical student section, down at the bottom line actually is the post-interview communication policy. This is actually the same policy from 2012, but I don't think anything has changed. And so specifically, there's really supposed to be no communication between faculty and applicants after the interview, unless that faculty member is a mentor or an advisee. Obviously, you have to communicate with those people in that process, and so that is excluded from it. There is not to be any unsolicited contact from anyone in the program to the applicant unless the coordinator needs some missing information, and then the coordinator would reach out to you. The current policy says that contact with residents in a program can only be initiated by the applicant, but the content of that communication can under no circumstances address the applicant's desirability of the program, the ranking, et cetera. So that was kind of the setup in the policy. But again, I would strongly encourage you to review and update, and we will email this as well once it's finalized, but an update on the post-interview communication policy. I do think the programs take this very seriously, and so it's really a goal, because what used to happen is you would be asked to go on second look weekends. You would get potentially people calling you asking, what do you think of this program? Where are you going to rank me? And it was really unfair to the students across the board. And so I think this has been a good change, and everyone has bought into this with that. There's but again, I would double check and listen again in November when the board will directly speak to it, and that'll be something that again agreed to by all the programs as well. But that's been pretty stable now for 8 years and followed.
There is a common interview invitation date, so that ACAPS recommends, and that's for coordination.
And that also, so that was something that was started last year, and I think worked really well. And essentially, the expectation, and almost all the programs adhered to this last year, and I suspect that they all will this year because it's been better disseminated. But yes, the goal was to have all the interview offers to the students on the same day, and then to give you 2 or 3 days to sort out all those interviews, and to then respond to respond the following Monday. So essentially, it's on a Friday that the programs will contact you. There's not a race, there's not a rush to respond quicker than anyone else, because you're not supposed to respond until Monday, and the programs aren't supposed to even look at that response until Monday. And I think this was a really smart move that the programs agreed to last year. Otherwise, you were spending from what used to be October 1st, essentially, until December 1st, every hour trying to check your phone to see if you had an offer and if you had to respond by then, and you were canceling interviews. And if you go back again to that initial webinar that we did, Dr. Gossman had some data showing the success of this program last year and how many fewer interviews had to be canceled, et cetera. Again, this will be reviewed as well as part of the November formal message from the ACAPS board, but this is something completely expected to occur again this year with, I think it's a date in December, I believe it's December 4th being the kind of release date, and then you having the weekend to put your schedule together to figure out which programs you want to respond to with a positive acceptance of that interview date. And then obviously, if there's other programs on the same day, you can then follow up with them and see if other dates are available, but it allows you to prioritize that as well. The programs also have been asked to only offer the same number of interview spots for a given date as they have available. Whether that happens in practicality or in reality, I don't know for sure. There may be programs that still have 2 interview dates and they sort of respond, go with kind of an order of responses on that Monday morning. But in general, in order to make this smooth, that has been the recommendation. And I think that's what most programs are going to do and continue to do.
There's a question about posters accepted to conferences that were canceled due to COVID, and then were published as abstract. Should you list it as a poster presentation or a published abstract? And at least what my institution is recommending, and what I think nationally institutions are recommending, is put it in the original category that it was accepted. For example, if you were going to do a podium presentation, list it as a podium presentation, and then in parentheses the planned date, and then in parentheses canceled due to COVID. That's the current recommendation, but I would keep it in the same category in which it was accepted. And do program directors look at the name of the journal when reviewing publications? So which is a question, does it matter where you're publishing? So I don't know whether this question is coming from, I published in JAMA, or I published in like an unknown journal. And the answer is yes. People will look at the journal, but I think that the specific journal is less important than where you are as an author. If you're the 5th of 8 authors in in a JAMA article. I think that you were probably just popped in for part of it, but weren't really involved in the, in the writing or the design. Whereas if you're a first author on a small obscure, of a paper in a small obscure journal, I'll still pay attention to that because it tells me that you were able to write a manuscript and it's not just writing the manuscript. It is, if you've ever submitted a paper, you've got to upload the paper, and then they want documentation, and then the system is down and you have to do it again. So it takes a certain dedication to even get through that. So I would say, yes, they look at it, but they put it into the context of what it looks like your involvement was.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, and to address it further, yes, I think if you have an application, a journal article in JAMA, New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, that does attract somebody's attention. Whether they distinguish it from Annals of Plastic Surgery to PRS to Archives of Plastic Surgery to the Journal of Otolaryngology, I think less so. They're not looking at specifically, does this journal have an impact factor of 2.5 or 3? That's really not going to make a difference. They're going to look more just at the work, what you've done, and then when they ask you about your ability to explain. Otherwise, yeah, if there's a couple of those really big superstar journals and you happen to have something that may catch somebody's eye, but otherwise, no, I just don't see the journal itself making a big difference directly. People will sometimes notice if what you've published a bunch of really isn't research, and I don't want to say they discredit it, but there are occasional situations where somebody works with the editor of a journal, so they are an author on a lot of the article reviews as part of that journal. And I think people may catch on to that and sort of say, oh, they have 8 publications, but these were all not really their research, they were responses. They're still legitimate items to put on your CV, don't get me wrong. But people will look at that in the global sense. But otherwise, no, I don't think the journal really matters at this point. And I wouldn't necessarily make a point of putting your impact factor on your CV next to the journal or anything like that.
Oh yeah, I would. So a couple of things about abstracts and papers in the chat. So should published abstracts be differentiated from full publications? I do that on my CV. I have 2 separate sections. And I think that most people would, because the rigor of the peer review process is slightly different for a full publication than for a published abstract. And for ERAS, including posters and presentations that you didn't personally present but contribute to and have your name on, I think that's fair game. I think if you participated in a project that was presented nationally, even if it was a poster, I think it is reasonable to list it on your application. With the, and I know there are kind of, so I'm trying to go through these ones at a theme, and we'll get back to some of the other ones.
Can I add to that for just a second? Because I think this is related to the projects and a question, where are papers or projects placed that are early in the works? For example, a title is made but far from being submitted. They're not really. This actually used to be an issue, I'll say back in my day, but kind of 15 years ago, people could put in progress and so everyone just had these essentially ghost publications that they had said, oh, well, yeah, I'm thinking about topic X, and they put a title down. Now ERAS requires that it either is published or accepted, and I think submitted, although I apologize for not knowing all the exact ERAS details, but anything before submitted definitely cannot be listed as a publication. If it is a research experience that you have been working on, you can put it under the the research or experiences sections, but be prepared to ask about it. I think it would be quite embarrassing to be in an interview room and someone to say, well, can you tell me about this project that is about tissue expansion in the lower extremity, and your response is, well, this was an idea we had and we just think it'd be interesting to research, and you can't explain the study. So make sure that those things are real and that you can talk about them, because if it's false or if it's fraudulent, it will be caught at some point. It will be called out. And I also would say plastic surgery is a small world. And just because one program catches it, I would assume that other programs have caught it, or we'll talk about that. So
there is a bit of, an arms race with publications and presentations as well. And I think that the people who are reviewing your applications are savvy. They are looking for quality and not just quantity. If somebody lists, 4 publications and 7 presentations, and it's not clear that that person was really engaged, that application may not be looked on as favorably as somebody who has 2 publications and that's it. But it is clear that this person was really involved in those publications. So I would, with the publications, I would focus on quality, and the way kind of your own bellwether for is it quality is, I would ask yourself, am I really proud of this? Like, is this work that I'm really proud of, that if somebody asks me about it, my eyes will light up? If that's the case, then yes, it should be on your application. If it's not the case, and it's a small presentation, you could consider leaving it off. I just want to answer this quickly because I don't want anyone to think that I've forgotten about it. With experience descriptions, should it be a statement of what the experience is, or some elaboration of what the experience means taught? I think, again, going back to Jeff's point, short and sweet. I think if somebody had, like, this is my experience, I volunteered in a homeless shelter, and then what you did, I was responsible for XYZ, and just a short sentence of, and I learned, I don't know, persevere, or whatever you learned. I think that would be great. And I do think that would be something interesting to talk about in an interview. If I saw that, like, I did this activity and this is what I learned from the experience, as well as this is what I did. I think that would be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. If you want to summarize the experience and its value to you, or its value to your application. If it's a research lab, I did the data analysis and ran the gels, learning how to, do Western blot and to use Stata. I think those types of things that demonstrate what was valuable in the experience are reasonable. But again, you need to keep it short, because once it's beyond a couple sentences, people stop reading. Question here is, we're kind of bouncing around, but for abstracts or posters that were presented or recorded in virtual meetings, should we write virtual in parentheses? I don't think so. I mean, if that's kind of the format right now, and it was the meeting, I don't think there's a reason to distinguish that specifically.
Yeah.
And if you want, but I don't think anybody's going to fault you if you just listed it regularly and said, oh, how was that presented? Oh, well, that was presented at the virtual part of the meeting, because that's the new norm right now. So I don't think there's a pro or a con to doing either way.
I agree with that. I agree. I think that the big issue was what to do with people who had accepted presentations and then they never even got a chance to present. So there's a question in the question box. If an applicant is in residency of another specialty hoping to rematch, or completed a residency, should they include letters from their previous application, or if you want to automatically transfer any letters from the previous match? So I personally look for relatively recent letters of recommendation. So somebody who's worked with you recently or knows you so well, who's worked with you, you know, for example, if you got a PhD and your thesis advisor writes you a letter, that would still be meaningful to me, even if you are 3 or 4 years out from your PhD. But a letter from a rotation that you did for a month or two from several years ago is going to be less meaningful than from somebody who has worked with you recently. So just so it has to do with the depth of the experience as well as the timeline. So the further away, the less relevant. And again, similarly, you know, if you are, say you're 15 years out from, you know, getting a PhD, then I would weight your, you know, your thesis advisor's recommendation less similarly.
Yeah, I mean, I think your dean's letter, they're going to use your dean's letter. I think everything else, if you're a couple years out, it doesn't matter what you were like in medical school at that point, or what you were on a rotation. People want to know what kind of doctor you are now, or what kind of person you are now. So I just don't think those old letters are going to be helpful. And, you know, being pragmatic about it, if they were letters that you were using in a previous match application and you didn't match, chances are you may not want to use those again. But I think fresh and new is what matters, especially because most likely the story you're going to tell or you're going to share is what you've learned from the experience and what you're doing now that's going to make you a good plastic surgery resident. And that's what you want to highlight. There's a question here about ERAS organizes the list of publications by alphabetical order. Is there a way to sort it by date of publication, acceptance, or by relevance? And the answer is I have no idea because I actually don't have access to ERAS. So I don't have the ability to look at how it manipulates or looks at your publications. I don't know if you have any idea, Deborah, or if anybody out there has an answer for it. I'm sorry, I don't have access to ERAS to know exactly all the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, no, that I don't know. I will say this, and I have read hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. I cannot recall if publications were listed alphabetically or chronologically.
I have no idea.
So that I wouldn't stress about.
There's a question, should clinical observership go under work experience or volunteer experience section in ERAS application? I think it depends what the clinical observership is. If you went and spent one day with somebody, I don't think it even belongs on your application, honestly. You know, if you had some true extended period of time that you were at another institution or working with somebody, then I think it probably fits best. My guess is under work experience. I think people look at it either way. They're probably more likely to have an interest in your work experience section than your volunteer experiences section. But again, this is one of those things where I think you need to make a judgment call because it has to be a real meaningful experience. You know, going and shadowing your pediatrician or your hometown doctor for a day or two, well, that's a valuable experience. I'm not taking away from the value. It doesn't add anything to your application. And then somebody's going to read it and think, oh, they're just trying to fluff up their application by adding these kind of, you know, 1 day or 1 hour commitments. So I don't know, Deborah, if you have an opinion about where it belongs. I don't feel strongly either way. And I don't think anyone reviewing the application would feel strongly either way.
Right. Again, just consider the depth of the experience and what it really, and think too about economy in terms of how you want to present yourself as a brand. I know that the temptation is to put everything in, and so that programs will see everything that you've done. But keep in mind, what that does is it sort of puts the burden on them to create a story about who you are. And if you have a relatively edited application that is thorough, but doesn't have a lot of extraneous details, that really builds a story of who you are, and that aligns with your personal statement and presumably what letters of recommendation are doing, then you've created this brand for yourself that makes you memorable. And so that's, I remember when I was preparing my books for my boards, we have to include pictures. And I was working with a photographer who worked in our office, and she had been trained as a photojournalist. And I had put every picture in. And she said, that's not what makes a good, a good story. What makes a good story is the pictures that you're taking out. So just keep that in mind as you think about your experiences. We read a lot of applications, and you see almost like credits rolling, experience after experience. But think about how each experience builds on your brand. And if the experience doesn't really build on your brand, the way that you want to present yourself to programs, then consider, especially if it was like a week or a month or something, then you can consider not including it.
I'm just going to follow on the themes here. If we were employed full-time in a paid research lab position before or during medical school, is that more valuable to be listed under research or work experience? I don't think it really matters either way, to be honest. I probably would put it under research overall. But I think when we're reading these applications, they blend together, because the volunteer, they all just read as one series of lines. So I don't think it really matters, and nobody's going to count which experience is which. But if you want my answer, fundamentally, I guess it belongs under research. I would put there.
There's a question about doing peer review for journals at this stage. Is it good or bad? I would say, if you are a primary reviewer, which is you are listed and they contact you directly and you are on their roster of official reviewers, then it is good. If you are doing reviews because the request went out to an attending of yours and the attending asked you to do it, then I would not include it.
Yeah, I would exactly agree. If you're getting the email from the journal and you're the reviewer, great. If it's somebody else and you're doing the work for them, probably not great. There's a couple other things. Should accepted abstracts to plastic surgery, the meeting, that were published in PRS Go journal categorized as peer-reviewed publications? I think we addressed this a little bit earlier, but typically, while people do list their abstracts because they show up in PubMed, they're really not manuscripts in that context, and since they're listed under your presentations. Again, I think you're not going to be directly faulted for it, but if that's all that's listed, people are definitely going to have they're just going to be a little bit fishy if that's the only thing in your publications is the abstracts listed, and kind of trying to think that you're kind of gaming the system. So I think if it's listed as the abstract, that's really where it belongs, because it's otherwise not a peer-reviewed manuscript or publication.
I want to just mention a couple. There were a couple of things in the chat. Where should a personal website digital portfolio link go within the application? And I will just admit, I don't know where it goes in ERAS. But one thing is whether anybody may go to that website. Some people when they're reviewing applications will look online to see what sort of content people publicly post online when they are reviewing applications. I personally don't do that, but I know that some people do. But when so I would just think about, without knowing more information, it's hard for me to say whether it is valuable or not to have a personal website on the application. I don't know if if in the application there is a website, whether that translates into somebody clicking on it to visit your website.
Yeah, I think that I've seen it occasionally where people are artists and they want to show their artwork, and obviously instead of carrying around their artwork, they will put, artist charcoal drawings, and they might put the website where they posted their work. I think that's fine. If you've started a business or something, I think it's reasonable. You don't see a lot of just kind of personalized developed websites. You don't see a lot of like, here's my Facebook link. I don't know if the Instagram will pick up or not in terms of CVs, but I think the important thing to think about is you don't create something just because to make it your application website, because everybody I think will find that a little bit odd, right? So if you create a website that's really all about me, or here's my highlight reel, like people do for getting college scholarships, that's odd. And the other issues, the other reasons to have websites, I guess it's okay if you want to put it at the bottom. I think a lot of people see it in the hobby section, but I'm not sure how many people really click through about it. There's a question. You previously mentioned listing poster presentations from national meetings on ERAS. Should we be excluding regional presentations or posters presented at local research days? Absolutely not. Those are all presentations for you. If they're at your medical school, a regional meeting, or your medical school research day, or your Department of Plastic Surgery research day, definitely list them. I wouldn't list the 5-minute talk that you gave on medicine rounds on pre-renal failure. But if you actually gave a research talk or something, 100% those should be listed as presentations. They're listed on my CV as well, honestly. If I present at regional meetings, or I present at our local research day, and I still include them because they're presentations. There's a question: if I did a 1-week virtual plastic surgery sub-I, do you think it's a good idea to list it in my ERAS application? I'll be honest, I don't know where you personally list it. And I would treat it like the visiting sub-Is, where we had no idea often where you did a visiting sub-I. Sometimes it showed up on the transcript. Typically the grades were so far behind that we never saw it. And I don't think it'll make a difference either way, personally. People aren't going to be looking to see that you did that or not, because everyone knows this year was goofy. And everyone also knows that people did all different versions of virtual sub-Is, and whether it was a 4-week virtual sub-I that was clinical, whether it was a 1-week sub-I that was more of an extended meet and greet and mentoring, or whether it was a 1-day type thing. I mean, I don't think it's bad to put it on there, but I don't think you're going to gain anything from having it on your CV personally.
Somebody questioned, if I work construction during summer breaks in undergrad, would that be of value in my work experience section? I would say, personally, I would say yes, because depending on what your experience was, but what that would tell me about a person is that they worked a hard job in heat that required a lot of physical labor, and that would tell me something about that person's work ethic. Whether or not that's right, and whether maybe I'm just making up a story in my head about their work ethic, but I would say, yeah, if you did something that you worked really hard at, absolutely include it. And it's something that program directors and faculty who interview look for. We're not just looking for a checklist of plastic surgery things, like, okay, you presented at this plastic surgery meeting, you published in a plastic surgery journal, you did plastic surgery research. We're looking for who people are as a whole person. And to the extent that people have had experiences that have been meaningful or have shaped their character outside of medicine, those are all worthwhile to include, because they really tell us something that we won't necessarily find out otherwise.
I know this is so funny because we're going all over the place, but we're just answering these questions as they come in. So there's a question, going back to art, is there a way to draw attention to an art or photography digital portfolio then? I think the best way is in your hobbies and to put a web link if you want to show people. And the people that are interested will look there. If you had an extended job where you ran your own art company, obviously that could go under work experience as well. I think either of those. If you really want to draw attention, your personal statement's the other place to put it. I will say, and for those that attended the webinar on personal statements, that sometimes the ability to do art, don't misinterpret that as people are going to think you are going to be a good surgeon. People are going to be interested in your art because you're interested in your art and what you can do. They're going to be interested in the dedication and the talent that you have, but they're not interested in it specifically because they think that's going to make you a better plastic surgeon. So keep that in mind when you're presenting it. They're going to see it as a skill, as a dedication, as something to talk to you about, but they're not linking in their mind, oh, this is the person I want, because they're going to be able to cut better than the person who can't draw. And so that's the one thing I would be aware of when you're trying to present yourself. If you've done a lot of art, is present it for the love of what you do, present it as your passion, as something you're dedicated to, that people will respond to. Don't present it as, oh, I know how to make a cleft lip look better, or I can do wonderful breast reconstruction because I have this artistic skill. That will fall on deaf ears. And then, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it was, it came up, this sort of topic came up in the personal statements that there are these categories of talent that we see often, and it's art, music, and athletics. And so a lot of applicants have talent in one of those three and have been really accomplished. And it was just kind of interesting, that athletes and musicians don't always get the opportunity to showcase what they've done, whereas artists can. So I would keep that in mind as well.
Going back real quick again to the posters and presentations, there's a question on ERAS: should we include posters or presentations that we did not personally present but contributed to and have our name on, or only posters and presentations that we personally presented? I've seen, heard mixed thoughts from residents and faculty. I don't know if there's actually guidelines. It's kind of funny. I was trying to look at the ERAS website, and there isn't actually specific guidelines on it. I think in general, people would expect you to only list those that you presented specifically, or that you were the mentor on. If you were part of a lab, but it wasn't your primary project and someone else presented it, typically you wouldn't list it again. But if you mentored somebody and you can speak to that, I think it's great. Again, somebody's going to ask you about why this is on your CV, and it puts everything else in question if your answer to this one is, well, I didn't really present it, I didn't even go to the meeting, I was just part of that lab group. It tends to sell a little bit of a potential false narrative that someone will then interpret the rest of your application and the rest of their interview through. So in general, that would be my thoughts.
And Jeff, just to add to that though, but if it's a project that you worked on, that you were really excited about, that maybe happened to be somebody else's project, so somebody else presented it, but you did a lot of work for it. And again, if somebody asks you about it, you will come across as engaged and like you had some ownership of the project, then I think that that's fine. Because then the project does reflect something about your interest and your talent.
There's a question here. Is there a limit to the number of interviews programs are allowed to send out? Is there a limit on how many applicants can go on? The answer is, with the current recommendations from ACAP, and this is what happened last year, programs were only to offer the number of spots they had available. And I think everybody, it seems like, followed that rule. And that's going to be the same this year. Because again, the goal being every applicant gets their whole slate of first round interviews. They can sit down and analyze them, and they can make their planned responses and go from there. Ideally, and what's been considered a best practice, although not every program may do it, is that you, specifically if you're a program that interviews on multiple days, you offer a specific day to each applicant, so that you are the applicant, if they say yes, they are automatically knowing they're getting that date. I cannot guarantee that that's what's going to happen, but that's been the recommendations, and I'm sure it will be stressed again to the program directors at the upcoming business meeting. But I would consider bringing this as a question as well to when we have the session in November, kind of prior to the whole interview release date, to get the official word from it. But the expectation is that if you've been offered an interview, it's not like college football scholarships where they offer more scholarships than they have spots for. If you've been offered an interview, you should be able to get that interview, hopefully. And then the second half, is there a limit on how many interviews applicants can go on? The answer is no. You can go on as many interviews as you are offered.
There's a question in terms of virtual interviews, would a virtual background be acceptable, or would you prefer a nice neutral background? So this came up in our how to present yourself virtually. I think for an interview, I might stay away from a virtual background, and I would use a live neutral background. The reason is sometimes the virtual backgrounds can get fuzzy, and so sometimes that can be distracting. It's nice to have something, like maybe a small something on the wall that is very neutral for an interview, because just a blank wall can also be distracting. But probably the most important thing is during a virtual interview, make sure that you have enough bandwidth, because it is really frustrating to try and interview somebody who keeps freezing on the screen.
And there's a lot of good websites right now. I mean, there was the one webinar, I think, where we got a little bit, they forgot to hit the record button, but there's a lot of great information, obviously, especially over the past 6 months, about how to present yourself in meetings and kind of forward lighting and those types of things. But I would agree with Deborah that I think that the background like I have right now, where you can see part of my chair and then it comes and goes, that's really distracting in an interview. And so I think having something more standard is going to just go over smoother. There's a question: if one research project was presented in multiple settings, i.e. a regional meeting, a national meeting, and published in a journal, would it make sense to include all of these? Yes, if you presented it multiple times, you should list each presentation. We all recognize things happen, can get presented more than once, especially at this stage and at those different settings. Great. So yeah, I would list them all. Do PDs have any interest in knowing what conferences or meetings we attended, even if we did not present at a specific meeting? I don't think so. But, and then we'll see what Deborah was going to say next year. I wouldn't list on your CV, I attended plastic surgery in the meeting, 2020 or 2019, sorry. But I do think those experiences are sometimes valuable to bring up in an interview, especially if that's where you met somebody. I heard your talk at this meeting, or I went to medical student day or resident day, and I learned this about you or your program. I think those are relevant, but in terms of just listing the meetings you've attended, I don't think anyone puts weight on that specifically. But maybe Deborah, do you have a different opinion?
No, I have exactly the same opinion. I don't think that people will use the what meetings or conferences you went to as a proxy for interest in plastic surgery or dedication to plastic surgery. I think that people will view what meetings you went to as, in the absence of other clarifying information, as just a reflection of who had money to give you.
Just a couple last questions here. How many experiences would you recommend including? Well, I don't know if there's a specific number. I mean, I think somewhere between 5 and 10 is probably very reasonable. I think this is one thing where the idea of an application that asks you to kind of just give your top 5, is helpful, because then you know what's important. But again, I think if they're meaningful, they should be included. But if you have too many that are just kind of one-liners or 1 hour things, or they're the same activity that you did on different dates, I just think that it's distracting, and people very quickly then try to flip through and they just ignore the rest of your experiences section. So I don't know if there's a magic number. Again, the research and the experience, and they all blend together when you review the application. And to be honest, I think ERAS half the time seems like it prints it twice. So then you get even more lost when you're reading reading through it.
Go ahead.
No, what do you think of applying to plastic surgery and general surgery at the same hospital or university?
We had covered that. That may be an issue. I think because programs talk, and probably the best strategy is to apply to plastic surgery and general surgery at different institutions.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think, there's a lot of cross communication. And the reality is that the general surgery programs at a lot of the places where there's plastic surgery are competitive programs as well. And I just think that it's going to be tricky to separate those two apart. So, yeah, if there's some place that you really want to be and you say, look, I have to be in city X, then maybe you roll the dice on that. But I think that the utility of applying to that general surgery program versus somewhere else, your odds are better somewhere else, personally. I think looking through, there's one last question that I know Deborah and I are saving for the end, only because I think it's the toughest one that we're going to have to answer here. Here's another one. If you ask a mentor at your home program to reach out to a program or two on your behalf, do you think that makes it seem like you don't want to stay at your home program? This is always tough. And I think the good part is that you can talk to your mentor. And I think it's important that you establish that communication with your mentor early. And I think you share with them what you're thinking and let them partly make the decision for you. I mean, they're going to reach out. And I think if you say, look, here's my top 3 programs, it's, place or University A, University B, and University C, and you happen to be at University A, they're going to know that they can reach out to University B and University C. And they're going to do that on your behalf because they're going to be hopefully your advocates in the whole process as well. And I don't think that directly gives them an idea of it not being your home program. And to be honest, I think if you just say, look, I think my top 3 choices are, although I haven't finalized my rank list, are blank, blank, and blank. Great. You can always come out and say, obviously, I really like this program, have an interest here. There are 2 other programs that really caught my eye. I think there's ways to get around it. And I would hope that most mentors would not push you back into a corner and say, well, tell us where we're ranked, and then I'll make my decision. I really think most of the mentors, and I hope that's true. And if it's not, then I personally feel kind of sorry for you on that, and that situation didn't work out like it should. But your mentor should be accepting of that and not necessarily even pushing you to ask that. So that's how I would approach it.
So your mentors and your programs want their students in general to match at programs. And so an honest and open communication with your home program is always best to that end. And I think, right, you can frame it, these are my top 3 programs, but I think being really honest, look, I think that this program is going to be my, at least in one of the top ones. The one caveat that I would say is, if you ask a mentor to make a phone call on your behalf to a program and frame it, that's your top choice, it had better be your top choice. Don't ask a mentor to make a phone call on your behalf and then, you know, not have it be your first choice. Because the reality is, if a mentor calls a program on your behalf and says, look, I have this great student, he says that you're his first choice, and they rank you highly and you don't match there, then it kind of undermines the credibility of your mentor, and it, you know, it undermines your credibility a little. And of course, your rank list is completely private, but and wherever you match is, you know, your number one choice. But just be careful about asking people to make phone calls on your behalf for your number one top choice.
So I think we've tried to address all the questions. I think the last one that's here is, what's the first thing you look at in the ERAS application? And I will tell you, my sort of true answer is I look at your board scores, but the only reason is because that's the first thing in the upper right corner on the sheet that goes in front of the applications that we get from our surgery education office. And to be honest, the next thing ends up being kind of your medical school. But are those really the things I look at first? I don't. Realistically, probably the thing that I look at first for me is your publications, and that's only because that comes earlier in the ERAS application there. That's not to say I think that that's what I value the most. If you want to know what I value the most, ultimately I probably value your personal statement, because it tells me what's important to you. Then probably your letters of recommendation are next, because that tells me what the other people that know you think about you. But if you really want to know what I see first, that's what I see first. I try not to let that taint, you know, my view of your application, either positively or negatively, but it's the first thing that jumps out in the packets when we get them.
Some programs use filters for board scores. So, you know, if you look at the board score, it's always going to be above a certain level. Other programs don't. I suppose, since we're being perfectly honest, that is my process too. I look at the board score and where somebody went to school, because it just gives me a frame of reference. But that's not to say that it's the most important thing. It's just helpful for me to just have in my mind, okay, where is this person at school? Because then as I read their clinical experience, or what they have to say about their about what they've done clinically, it's helpful for me to know, are they at a huge school? Are they at a small school? Are they at a school without a plastic surgery program? Because that just helps me put context to it. I look at, again, it's the totality of the application. After you go through everything, you get a sense of you know, who a person is or what's important to them. People who make that, I value it when people make that easy for me, when they have a good story to tell about who they are and their application has been carefully edited for that brand. So I appreciate that, but I also look at the personal statements tend to read very similar across the board, but I also look at experience. And a lot of times when I look at experience, one of the things that that I'm looking for is, you know, have you done things that are maybe a little bit different? Have you done things that you could have learned from or grown as a person? Have you sought out experiences that maybe were humbling? That tells me a lot about you. So I look at that, but that's just my process. And you could talk to 10 people and they would have different ways that they approach applications. But I think that what all of us have in common is that we're trying to figure out who you are as a person. And to the extent that the application makes that easy, it is appreciated.
I knew I should have had Deborah answer first, because I can't take back my answer, obviously. But it is true, because what's on the front page. But I will say that the medical school thing, you're right. I think that's not a criteria for me. It's a way to judge often what I'm going to read next. And I think that's, especially for the students on here that are at schools that may not have a lot of plastic surgery exposure, it's helpful for me to understand where you're coming from to know how to interpret everything else. And so, I think that point that Deborah made is very true, and that it's not the quote unquote ranking or whatever component you want to put on that. It's just understanding where that falls in the relevance of your access to plastic surgeons and your access to certain things, because while everyone works really hard, those that may not have had all the opportunities to have research or other clinical experiences, but then yet made them happen, that's really valuable. So I'll retrospectively sort of change my answer, outside of the fact that if you just threw all the papers in the air and I had to pick one up, I would stick with my order. So I think we've addressed all the questions. I hope this was helpful. At this point, there's a month hiatus or so for at least ACAP sponsored Zoom events. I recognize there's potentially other stuff still going on, and please let us know if there's something that we haven't provided or that we can provide to you as the students this year moving forward. We will continue to communicate through the email system with any significant updates, changes that we think are relevant. As I said, as any policies that are coming out are finalized, we will make sure those are communicated both in writing and again, as well, through the webinar in November with Dr. Weber leading that charge. So.
Yeah, and I would say even after, as things wind down from a programming standpoint, ACAPS will be posting their policy guides. We sent out an email with frequently asked questions, and one of them is the upcoming policies on interviewing. So we will continue to be posting information as it comes, but once the interview season is over, we hope that you'll also give us feedback. Like once you go through and you're out on the other side, give us feedback and let us know what worked for you with this year's programming, what didn't work. We want to continue programming for next year, and we want to improve on it. And obviously all of your perceptions are going to be really valuable.
All right, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you in a month or so.
Bye.